Hi everyone, this is Dragon GGY. This is the Operator Hindsight for Tragodia, which marks the second anniversary of this series. Thank you all for your love and support, as well as bearing with me behind schedule. As you may or may not know, I've been playing on EN as well, making some real progress so far. But it gets tricky when I want to well a little. So real quick, before we start the episode, be sure to check out Lootbar, which I use for topping up in EN. It's a trustworthy top-up platform, comes with great aftermarket services, which you can verify if you look up the 4.9 ratings and comments in Trustpilot. Lootbar makes sure that you get the best deal out of all available currencies. On top of that, you also get a 6% off coupon as new users to the platform for a total of 16% discount. To use, you can use the link in the description and pinned comment and simply signing up. From there, select your desired pack, click Top Up now to finish your payment, and you can use their self-top-up cloud service to buy the pack. It can be done in no time at all. So, if you're like me, having trouble topping up in Emulator, or if you're looking for a good deal to save money on purchases, be sure to check out Lootbar using my exclusive link. Again, in the description or the pinned comment. Alright, now back to the episode. Tragodia is a 6-star ritualist in the supporter class. Trait of the archetype, attacks deal arts damage and can inflict elemental injury. So, yep, another addition to the growing element system. We've covered basics of different archetypes related to elements over and over, if you remember the can and can opener theory. So we're gonna cut it short this time. Ritualist alongside Primal Protector is the effective burst inducer archetype that deals injury based on attack, which is unaffected by defense, resistance, or damage reduction. Tragodia is a nerve elemental ritualist, which is relatively new, so we're gonna focus on that. The effect of Nerve Burst is dealing 6,000 elemental damage, the lowest total so far in all elements, and inflicting 3 stacks of paralysis. Then, the effect of paralysis is that each stack can interrupt enemies when they're about to do damage with an auto attack. If the enemy's attack windup is rather long, it will be interrupted after 2 seconds. Either way, affected target will enter a 0.5 second interrupt animation where they get shocked and tremble. Paralysis stacks up to 3 times and is indicated by the lightning icon and its field volume for stack count. It usually lasts forever, but enemy with status resistance will lose 1 stack every 5 seconds. Compared to Frighten, which is a similar status, Paralysis does not require enemies to be blocked, which is a pro, and can work on unblockable enemies. Frighten, as a timed status, is generally better for enemies who attacks fast as they don't even initiate an attack action, while for Paralysis, it's more dominant against slow attacking enemies, like the Rock Golem. With restacks on Nerve Burst, it's very easy to lock down these enemies forever, but keep in mind, both Frighten and Paralysis do not stop enemies from using their skills. The cooldown of Nerve Burst is 10 seconds, the same as Burn Burst. Comparing with Necrosis and Burn, Nerve leans towards soft crowd control and isn't as damage focused as the other 2 elements. Now onto his talents. Talent 1 attacks deals an additional 30% of attack as nervous impairment, and deal 20% instead to enemies around the target, 33 and 23% respectively for potential 3 or above. The splash radius is 1.3 tile, which is awesome when you think that splash casters only have 1.1. By the way, nervous impairment is the name for the elemental injury of the nerve element. I say this because for other elements, the same term is called necrosis damage, burn damage, and corrosion damage. Most likely a historical problem just to clear up some potential confusion. So again, a reminder that inflicting elemental injury on auto attacks is not a norm for ritualists, and having this property is instant QOL, not to mention that he also gets to do it in an AoE fashion, which makes it more efficient against masses of enemies, and ties him with his skill designs pretty well. Below are stats related to his efficiency. Don't worry, this is more for reference, and I have a customized breakpoint calculator coming up in the module section. Talent 2, when deployed, all enemies on the field under the burst effect of nervous impairment have attack speed -12, -16 at potential 5. When enemies within attack range perform normal attacks, they take 70 points of nervous impairment. This impairment is inflicted before that attack deals damage, and if just so happens it's enough to trigger a nerve burst, that exact attack will be interrupted by the paralysis from the nerve burst. The principle of this talent is simple, reducing the attack speed of enemy in bursts so that the paralysis stacks are spent at a slower pace, and is more significant towards enemies with long attack intervals. While on the other hand, if you are fast attacking types, you suffer more frequently from the impairment on attack. However, as it's only 70 per attack out of a 1000 meter, it's honestly not super effective, perhaps only saving one auto attack from Tragodia. Tragodia comes with the Ritualist X module, trait update dealing 18% more elemental injury to elite and boss enemies. Upgrades go to Talent 2, the attack speed reduction for enemies in burst is increased by 8, now up to 24, and the impairment from active attacks is increased by 20 points to 90. Base effect is a massive injury scale to increase effectiveness on elite and boss. It's a major jump up in efficiency from no module situations. Upgrades honestly are valued mostly for the attack attribute increases. They make up for the lack of potentials or levels. The actual effects do create some marginal crowd control gains from Talent 2, which will be indispensable for situations like contingency contracts, but for the common player base, they are not nearly as crucial as reaching certain breakpoints. Overall, the key offers are the increased effectiveness against elites and bosses, as well as making up for stats gaps. Because operator level potentials, namely Potential 3 with the Talent 1 improvement and Potential 4 with attack attribute, as well as module levels are all key factors for breakpoints, considering their main job is to introduce bursts as efficiently as possible. So I made a Tragodia breakpoint calculator, which you can download to your end to use, linked in the description and pinned comment. You're able to input and compare two different builds by your own customization to better get an idea of in what department and how far you want to go. Again, the talent upgrades are certainly improvements, just not game-changing, especially in casual contents. So for my general conclusion, I say level 1 is most mandatory, while the upgrades are highly recommended, especially for players who have him below Potential 4. Again, use the breakpoint calculator to find out about your Tragodia. Now for skills, my recommendation is Skill 2 over Skill 3 over Skill 1. Skill 2 is a summon-based pinpointing art plus nerf burst trigger plus crowd control 3 in 1 on a short cooldown, which resembles the Helidrop playstyle that you would expect from fast redeployment units, while Tragodia himself can play from a safe distance. Skill 3 is a sophisticated skill, which serves to completely lock down multiple enemies from attacks and movements with various favoring mechanics that just make it better and better, to the point that it's easily the crowd control powerhouse. But being a crowd control focused skill, it does have a lower relevance to daily gameplays. Skill 1 is an AFK skill that can also easily achieve permabind on one target with some attack speed bonus, but like many good operators, it's just extremely outshined by the other two skills, both in terms of damage and crowd control capability. Skill 1. The next attack deals 150% of attack as art damage twice and binds the target for 3 seconds. Targets receive 1.8 times more nervous impairment during the bind. Prioritizes attacking enemies not under burst effect. This is a 2/2 offensive recovery auto skill. Stats as shown in the table, EI is short for elemental injury, and for the case of module level 3, it will be in grunt/non-grunt, aka elite and boss. In terms of AFK, if we compare it with Virtuosa Skill 1, it obviously deals less damage, especially when Virtuosa has gotten 2 modules in a row that both increase the total EDOT that she can deal from the Crosses Burst. It doesn't store charges, and comparing with the splash mechanic to the stagger in range of Virtuosa, it will be less effective when enemies are more spread out. On the bright side, the skill has bind as a hard control, but despite being able to splash on auto attack, the skill itself is single target. And on the side note, Tragodia is not limited, so if you haven't picked up Virtuosa, this skill in a certain degree can do similar thing, but I generally would not recommend. The second application is single target permabind. The two attacks with skill both deal bind, so the actual bind time is 3.4 seconds in a 4.8 second cycle. That means 71% crowd control coverage just by himself. And being a 2 SP offensive recovery skill, you can achieve even higher coverage with attack speed buffs. By calculation, you need at least 44 attack speed bonus for one target permabind, which can be covered by just King's New Lens in IS. You can also do it with Akito's IS module, although not to a perfect degree. That is much easier than Chill by Skill 1, which serves a similar purpose, with Tragodia Skill 1 having a shorter reach. But to wrap up, this skill, despite having some on-paper applications, is not even close as impactful and dominant in crowd control compared to the other skills. Skill 2, attack speed plus 35, Talon 1 splash radius increased from 1.3 to 1.5. When skill is active, can deploy a Blood Whisper, which lures up to 4 enemies who enters its range and can path to it, prioritizing elite or boss enemies for 10 seconds after deployment. Once the first target arrives at its position or that 10-second timer runs out, retreats and slows all surrounding enemies for 6 seconds, dealing 150% of Tragodia's attack as arch damage and 25% of attack as nervous impairment every 0.5 seconds. The skill has unlimited duration and the summon has its own redeployment time. This is a 0/25 auto skill. The stats are shown here. One key metric here is that the total injury dealt from the summon is 1785 for grunts and 2106 for elite and boss. This is important because it means that you are guaranteed to always trigger burst on any enemy with one summon use. This is possible with a level 90 potential 1 Tragodia and module level 2 or above, and this is the main reason I would advocate for the module. The summon also deals 10k-ish arch damage. That sums up with the 6000 E damage to 16,710 in total, which is not bad at all, and more on that coming up. First, let's get the mechanics out of the way, starting with Lure as a new crowd control. It basically sets a new and temporary destination for enemies to path to, and similar to you, Skill 2's Teleport, an enemy must have a viable path to the Lure destination for it to be effective. So you can put it in a fence or across a sealed wall, enemies will not be affected in those cases. When they do get lured, enemies will adopt the shortest path to the destination, which differs from standard pathing. Now there's a whole other can of worms about pathing mechanics in this game, so I'm not gonna bother that. In short, when turning corners are involved, enemies will take a shorter path towards the lure destination, but walk a longer path back. In such scenario, it is possible to stall an enemy indefinitely just on his own. But of course, this is also dependent on their movement speed as well. When lured, enemies cannot be blocked, and this is a handy way to free enemies from being blocked without retreating the operator. Lure can be resisted by status resistance, where the effective duration of lure will be halved. And finally, lure has a lower priority than fear, so when a target is both feared and lured, they will go to the feared destination first. Next, we talk about the summon, where the true magic lies. The summon has a 25-second redeployment time, and the timer starts on deployment instead of on leaving the field, much like the clone of the original Phantom. Of course, that redeployment time is affected by buff and debuff, but this ensures that each cycle is always 25 seconds, and that's huge. The summon automatically retreats 10 seconds after its deployment, or when a lure target enters the 0.4 tile radius of itself. It will update the lure target list every 0.1 second until reaching max, so targets who come into the range late can also be lured as long as it has not reached the cap. By the way, the range is the typical diamond range, which you can also tell from the visual effects. And then comes the juicy part. While lure can only apply to up to 4 targets, the damage, nervous impairment, and slow on trigger will apply to all targets in that diamond range, and these effects will still apply when manually retreating the summon. Usually, there will be a 1.5 second delay before triggering the effect on auto-retreat, be that enemies have reached where the summon was, or when the 10-second timer runs out. However, that delay will also be skipped when retreated manually. So the rule of thumb here is that you would want to wait for the auto-trigger if you need the stall from lure, or you would generally retreat it manually when you want the after effects more. Doing the manual retreat to immediately trigger the effects is a crucial way to utilizing the skill, and trust me, you'll do it very often. On top of that, both the lure and the effects will affect aerial enemies, which is absolutely crazy. Do keep an eye out for spike chests or other damage ricochet though, as all the damage sources back to Tragodia and uses his cached attack stat on effect trigger. With all these mechanics explained, I think you can more or less get the power behind the skill. It really resembles what you expect out of a Hella Drop FRD unit. Damage rise, since the nerf burst trigger is guaranteed, you get 10k RT damage and 6k E damage in one use. Comes with 6 seconds of slow and 3 stacks of paralysis, which is enough to dispose most grunts and a good number of elites in one use, and heavily cripples them even when they survive that. The summon has a 25-second cycle, which on first glance seems longer than the typical 15 seconds from Executors, but don't forget Executors tend to stay on the field for a little longer, which also makes their cycles longer, while the summon always comes back in 25 seconds after its last deployment. Now, to be very honest, other than Yato Auto Skill 3, which finishes dealing damage fast and stays absolutely safe, this skill has affected the value of most FRD units. And don't forget the fact that while FRD units are usually squishies that can easily die from their Hella Drop missions, the summon in this skill is untargetable, literally just a bomb that no one can stop from setting off, while at the same time, Tragodia himself can be safe and sound in your defense line and assisting with lane holding. Next application is, again, stalling. Its crowd control coverage is dependent on enemy movement speed though. If the enemy is slow, then the slow from effect trigger is less impactful because there's the minimum movement speed of 0.1 in Arknights. If the enemy is fast, they may reach the lure destination before the timer runs out, but either way, it's still very good, since it literally makes enemies walk back and slows them as they return. Again, you can solo stall slower enemies with those turning corners, but that's quite situation dependent. In most cases, you will need a dual partner to achieve the permastall. That can be trap masters, a FRD unit that fills in the gap, etc. The option is vast, and it's very easy to achieve given the already high coverage. And finally, as part of the path manipulation toolbox, the lure can be used to gather enemies for damage, move threatening enemies to a safer location, or to chain with other tools like fear or teleport. Just good luck being an enemy in Arknights 2025. Skill 3, Attack Range Expands, attack plus 125%. Prioritizes attacking enemies not under a burst effect. Enemies that have received nervous impairment from Tragodia while the skill is active take 10% of attack as nervous impairment per second until the burst effect is triggered. Enemies within attack range has plus 15% to their nervous impairment cooldown recovery rate. Enemies entering the burst effect of nervous impairment will generate or refresh a cage of chaos at their ground position. This is a 30/40 30 seconds auto recovery skill. The skill range is the same as Virtuosa and Suzerain skill 3 with the increased attack. Tragodia will be able to trigger bursts on enemies much faster. Again, please refer to the exact attack count in the breakpoint calculator. Tragodia reduces about 25k arts damage in skill, and burst duration will be cut down from 10 seconds to 6.67 seconds. So by most, enemies will take 6k times 4, 24k E damage from burst during this skill. So the summon of skill 2 was impressive. Now let's take a look at Cage of Chaos, the summon of skill 3. First, about its key function, blocking. It can block any number of enemies that's on the tile when it's spawned or refreshed, regardless of the block count requirement of certain enemies. An existing cage will only block new enemies that arrive at the tile when it's refreshed. The cage can block aerial enemies, and can block ground and aerial enemies in the same cage. Wow. The cage also uses a different block interaction than usual blocks. To simplify, it will try everything to pull enemies to the center of the tile whenever it's spawned, instead of pushing them outwards when they're off-center. Due to this feature, sometimes the cage will be spawned outside of attack range. It isn't a big deal though. The cage will immediately despawn when not blocking enemy. For other behaviors, the cage adopts a damage instance-based health with a standard HP of 3. This can be increased by HP buffs, but you'll need a good amount to get that digit to go up, so most relevant in IS. It cannot recover HP in any way, including passive recovery means. Good news is, it can only be targeted by and take damage from enemies currently blocked by it. This is really QOL and prevents it from breaking by random damage, including no specific source damage like toxic mists. The cage can also be spawned on non-deployable ground tiles, which is yet another crazy mechanic. That includes not only tiles that they marked out visually that tells you cannot deploy operators on, but also includes holes, portals, and the red and the blue box. So you don't have to worry about taking up tiles as much like Necros, but it does not spawn on the tile that's already occupied by deployed units, so yeah, you do need to make some space for him. On skill activation, it will immediately spawn a cage for enemies who are in burst at that moment, but afterwards, if an enemy in burst walk into range, it wouldn't spawn a cage and you'll have to wait for the next burst on that target or others nearby. One last bit is that the cage actually continues to exist for a whole 30 seconds after the skill ends, which is kinda unbelievable. It's also the key reason for his performance in CCB4, which revolves around trapping the last few enemies in the cage and using Force Sway and Frighten from Laser Altar to keep the cage alive until the next skill. You can also manually retreat the cages if needed. The principle behind the design is very coherent, so here's a little breakdown. Attack increase to facilitate faster bursts, which is important because the skill is designed to do multitasking and you don't want to spend a lot of hits on the same target. The injury DOT is a great way to help with that, because with the splash feature it helps to spread injury even when Tragodia is still single target. With the priority on enemies not in burst, it creates a staggering chain of burst triggers, so that the cages will have more chances to refresh their HP. Enemies initiating attack will also trigger the DOT thanks to Talent 2, so that even when Tragodia is attacking somewhere else, other enemies potentially trapped by the cage will start to get the injury as well, so that the multitasking from Tragodia isn't as intense. Burst cooldown reduction is very easy to understand, refreshing the paralysis stacks more frequently and squeezing in more E damage via bursts. The design of the cage is an ingenious way to turn the soft CC of nerve burst and paralysis into a pseudo-bind hard crowd control. The cages are also double protected by the attack speed reduction and paralysis stacks. An enemy would need to exhaust all 3 stacks of paralysis before hitting the cage 3 times to break it, which is more than often enough time for another burst to happen, which undo all their progress. So by experience, the cages almost never break during the skill. Knowing all that, there will be situations where this skill is less favored. Having too few or too many targets may lead to the cage HP not being able to refresh off of burst triggers or breaking down too fast from attacks, but these are dependent on the actual enemies trapped within the cage. Due to the nature of paralysis, it's true that the skill is more effective on slow attacking enemies. If enemies are attacking fast enough, they may be able to break out, especially when multiple of them are trapped together. As you can see, one enraged possessed soldier doesn't break the cage before the next burst, but 2 of them together will do. Also, if the enemy has skills or other special properties that allow them to do damage bypassing paralysis, the cage may break very fast as well. For example, the multi-hit in Patriot's Phase 1, as well as his DOT aura in Phase 2, which counts as damage from him, the block target, and thus will do damage to the cage. Finally, towards enemies that just cannot be blocked, the skill simply doesn't work. Tragodia spending attacks on them is also a waste of time. Bind and Slow should be your alternate choice for those enemies. So to conclude, the skill offers multi-lane, multi-target stalling crowd control. Compared to similar skills like Suzerain Skill 3 and Mostima Skill 3, the key advantage of this skill is that enemies literally cannot move, and the 30 seconds extra duration for cages leaves room for chaining other controls, which we already see in CCB4. You can see the skill as having multiple tanking units to stop enemies from progressing, but without the need for cost, the concerns about sustaining them, etc. That's how advanced the mechanics are for this skill. But outside of that, other than those less favored situations we discussed, I want to point out the underlying limitation to its application. And to put it straight, it's the fact that it's not a damage-focused skill. It traps down enemies, but it doesn't even cleave them all like Virtuoso's skill 3. It also doesn't provide any buffs or enchantments, so the combo option is also limited. But as an early heads up, this is the main skill for the nerf combo of Tragodia plus Mantra, the upcoming 6-star nerf primal caster. So if you're looking forward to that, you have to invest in this one as well. At the end of the day, not everyone stalls and chains CC all the time, if at all. So despite being a crowd control powerhouse, the skill is significantly less relevant for most players, like how you wouldn't use skills like Suzerain skill 3 or KOB skill 2 in a lot of casual contents, and that also stays true, or even more so, in buff game modes. Before we wrap up, let's talk about his interaction with the nerf element pieces. Miss Christine is the budget option. You probably have gotten her while pulling for Tragodia, but her damage is limited. Mantra is the real deal for this section. She's arriving in 4 months, and she's the best damage dealer to utilize all of Tragodia's mechanics. Mantra plus Tragodia skill 3 deals the highest damage in all of your 1+1 element duels in a 2-target environment. But again, they are situation dependent like the Blaze Yu combo. For others, we have Thon's Delta module and Grace Bearer, both of which I think isn't worth the effort and resources to force that combo, so I'll just leave them here. In summary, Tragodia is a 6-star ritualist, a crowd control super unit, and he does his job of inducing nervous impairment exceptionally well. His talent set ensures that, while also playing to the strengths of the paralysis status. His skill sets adds bind, lure, slow, and block out of nowhere, on top of paralysis as a soft CC, making him the crowd control character. Skill 2 brings flexible and consistent halo drop damage that you can basically use to fulfill most of your FRD needs. Skill 3 provides multi-target, long-duration lockdown with some of the most fancy mechanics that were never seen before in character design. Some details of these 2 skills kinda give me the impression that they were very determined to make him good. Like, I think no one would have complained if the skill 2 summon doesn't do anything when manually retreated, but they put in the QL anyways. For upcoming performances, he's yet another great addition to your 12 Ops daily team. He's the new safety belt. Skill 2 is a really good skill to scavenge hairy situations. For IS, you can use him as a starter. He gets the key skill in E1 and can save you in poor runs before you get your main damage dealer. But hear me out, do not expect him to be your core damage, especially in high difficulties. He just scales very little under buffs, as is the nature of the archetype. Of course, speaking of stalling, he absolutely dominated CCB 4. 2 lanes, 6 enemies, no problem. Attack and attack speed debuffs didn't bother him too much either. In RA, you can use him to lure enemies like the Wild Beast for capture. It's super handy now, especially when you work with the Unectis RA module that also draws in enemies. Rating-wise, I'm gonna go with 9 in daily. Skill 1 is the traditional AFK option, but again, I want to highlight Skill 2 in this discussion. It's literally an AFK lane holding skill plus a FRD unit that you can halo drop anywhere to cause some chaos, or punish enemies while they are idle. The whole 2-in-1 offer is available after a 25-second warm-up. For Advanced, I'm going to give him the grand 10 out of 10. To be honest, I'd say he's more on the 9.5-ish mark because he's still lacking in the damage department. But then, for a ritualist, not only does he do his job splendidly, he made himself known for his crowd control more instead. Buff game mode, which supposedly would be a weakling for a ritualist, we know that from Virtuosa already, but while most of the same principle remain true for Tragodia, all the built-in mechanics of this character made it so that he's good in other aspects. In IS-5, the skill 2 summon can be deployed anywhere, so you'll have an easier time breaking the spike of epochs, crunching through damage reductions, and in IS-6, there are summon-related relics to work with. Yes, the damage from one summon use isn't a lot, but that wouldn't matter when you can spam them indefinitely. Yes, he gets weaker in terms of damage implications later in the run, but you still get to make use of his crowd controls to stall bosses. It may not be as brainless, but it's hardcore we're talking about after all. In CC, skill 2 can still trigger bursts on elite enemies in one summon use, but it's usually crippled by redeployment debuffs. Instead, skill 3 gets to shine with its minimal reliance on survival. Enemy may do astronomical damage, but it'll all just be 1 HP for the Cage of Chaos. You're locking an enemy in the same place, not by stun, not by freeze, not by bind. It's blocking, so it also bypasses a lot of those immunities as well. Overall, nothing crazy about his stats, but all his mechanic designs lean heavily towards his favor, so bravo to the designer team behind this operator. There are a lot of reasons to pull for him. For the more casual side, it's skill 2. For more hardcore gameplay and future synergies, it's skill 3. Now, for gameplay, I do want to stress again that he doesn't do a lot of damage to start off. He doesn't scale well with buffs, and he doesn't provide much buffs. He's more of a debuffer, so do always have the right expectation. But with that said, he's just viable in almost every upcoming game mode, although not necessarily game-changing. And if you plan on pulling Mantra a few months later, Tragodia is the necessary component for her full potential. That's gonna wrap up this episode. Thank you all for watching. We have an intense schedule coming up, and as it's close to the end of the year, it gets really tough on my end too. So if this episode helped you out in any way, please drop a like and subscribe. I did consider dropping the Silver Ash family in for this preview, but it's still a little too early. I also did skip Sanctum Mid-Separado due to time constraint. We'll have to see if there's a better time later. Alright, that'll be it. See you in the next video then. Bye bye.